The snow was falling hard when she heard the knock, a knock that didn't belong in the safety of Elias's cabin. Samantha opened the door and came face to face with the man who had humiliated her in front of a whole town, now broken, filthy, and begging for help. Her eyes didn't flinch. Her voice didn't tremble. She said something so cold, so final that even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The rejection. Samantha Turner had never belonged, not in the way people mean when they talk about being part of a community. She was born in a patch of Tennessee where time moved slowly and opinions never did. Her hometown, Fair Hollow, was little more than a scatter of tin-roof houses, a rusting post office, and a white-steepled church where Sundays smelled of damp hymn books and judgment. From childhood, Samantha had carried more than the average girl. More height, more breadth, more presence. By 12, she was taller than most boys in school. By 16, she was broader than every girl in town. Adults called her big-boned or hearty, as if using softer words would disguise the meaning. Kids didn't bother. They said whale, blubber, ogre. And as those children grew into adults, their cruelty only refined. They cloaked it in silence, side eyes, or saccharine pity. Her mother had died young. Her father, a sawmill laborer, passed not long after, his lungs claimed by decades of dust. Samantha lived on in their modest log house, sewing quilts for neighbors who never invited her to weddings, funerals, or potlucks. Her hands stitched for everyone, but no one stitched a place for her. It wasn't loneliness that ached most, but invisibility. She was a ghost who left casseroles on porches and never got a knock in return. But despite all of it, Samantha didn't turn bitter. She loved fiercely in private. She loved old music, books with broken spines, and the smell of warm bread on a rainy day. She adored stories of true love and handwritten letters and soulmates found in unexpected places. What kept her heart beating wasn't what she had, but what she still believed could be. That somewhere, someone was looking for a woman exactly like her. That belief led her to the mail-order bride agency. It started as a curiosity. She found the notice tucked inside an old copy of Farm and Field, a creased advertisement promising companionship, devotion, and honest beginnings for gentlemen seeking solid marriages. The phrase solid marriages struck her as old-fashioned and oddly dignified. She stared at it for weeks before answering. Gregory Allen's first letter arrived in a rigid brown envelope, his penmanship proud and crisp. He wrote of solitude, of wanting a woman who wouldn't disappear in a storm. He wrote of losing his mother young, of building his Montana ranch with blood and grit, of needing softness to balance the cold in his bones. Samantha read his words again and again until the pages softened at the edges. Over the next few months, their letters danced between them like fireflies in summer. He sent pressed flowers from the field. She sent hand-stitched bookmarks with tiny lavender borders. His words were thoughtful, flattering, attentive. "I admire a woman of strength," he wrote. "A full life needs full arms to hold it." It was enough to make her believe again. Believe that her size was not a burden, but a gift that someone could treasure. So she sold nearly everything. The antique wash basin, her father's woodworking tools, her entire quilt inventory. She kept only what could fit in 2 trunks, heirlooms, letters, warm clothing, and 3 quilts she made just for Montana. One had wheat stitched in golden thread, another with the stars of a northern sky, and a final one, her favorite, with 2 hands reaching toward each other across a stitched field. The train ride from Tennessee to Montana took 4 days. Samantha sat by the window, heart surging with hope, each mile a promise fulfilled. She practiced how she'd greet him. She imagined his eyes lighting up. She imagined his arms, strong and wide, wrapping around her. At every stop, she adjusted her scarf, retouched her braid, whispered little reminders of courage to her reflection in the fogged windowpane. But when the train finally slowed into Butte's snow-covered station, her courage began to tremble. She stepped off carefully, her boots crunching on the icy platform. A dozen faces waited under breathy clouds of steam, scanning the arrivals. And then she saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven with a black coat dusted in snow. Gregory Allen. His expression didn't register recognition. Just a pause. Then a narrowing of the eyes, a tightening of the jaw. "You're not what I expected," he said flatly. Samantha stood straight, blinking against the chill. "It's me, Samantha Turner," she said, voice warm, trembling with nerves. His eyes darted to the trunks at her feet, then to her body, moving from her face to her waist, down to the hem of her coat and back up again, the way a cattle buyer might assess a beast before a bid. "I thought you said you were curvy," he said, his voice dropping, low and sharp like a blade dragged across bark. "You didn't say you were enormous." The words landed with finality. All the air left her lungs. Around them, no one spoke, but people paused, strangers who didn't know her name, yet instantly understood what was happening. A few turned away, uncomfortable. A few stared. One man smirked. Samantha stood frozen, not from the cold, but from the sudden crack in the foundation of her reality. "I came all this way," she murmured, hoping, somehow, that he hadn't meant it, that he was just shocked, that he'd take her hand and everything would smooth over. Gregory shrugged. "You lied. I don't take kindly to liars." His voice lacked anger, only contempt remained. He turned and walked away, boots crunching on the packed snow, never once glancing back. He didn't even ask who would carry her bags. The train hissed behind her. The cold settled deeper. Samantha didn't chase him. She didn't beg. She simply watched the man who once called her anchor disappear like smoke through mountain air. Her hands slowly slid from her bags to her sides. She stood in silence, the last passenger on a platform she never should have stepped onto. Her breath steamed in the air like a ghost leaving her body. And yet, she remained standing. Because Samantha Turner, though rejected, humiliated, and alone, had known loneliness before. And though this wound cut deeper than any she'd ever felt, she wasn't broken yet. Her story wasn't over, just irrevocably changed. Alone in the wild butte, Montana was no place for softness. The town, carved into the cold rock of the northern wilderness, breathed coal dust and spit out men hardened by whiskey, labor, and quiet violence. Into this world stumbled Samantha Turner, her dreams ash-stained and unraveling by the hour. After Gregory's brutal rejection, she wandered aimlessly through snow-slicked streets, dragging her suitcase like a weight behind her. The last of her money went to a cramped room above McGrady's saloon, thin walls, a crooked bed, and the distant rumble of bar fights below. The mirror on the wall was cracked, but it didn't matter. Samantha no longer looked for herself in reflections. What she saw now was a woman emptied out. But word in a town like Butte traveled fast, and twisted faster. She became legend before the week was out. The fat mail-order bride who'd tricked a rancher into thinking she was something she wasn't. The jokes were cruel, the laughter louder than any saloon music. Women whispered behind coffee cups. Men laughed with their backs turned just enough to say they weren't cowards, but not enough to show mercy. Still, Samantha endured it. She walked the streets early in the morning, when most people still slept and the snow covered the ugliness of things. She bought day-old bread. She avoided looking people in the eye. And then one night, in a corner of McGrady's filled with cigarette smoke and sour ale, her name came up again. Elias Brooks was sitting alone, as always, a hulking man with hands like timber stumps and a face half burned by a childhood fire. He'd lived on the edge of town for years, deep in the forest, far from the cruelty of men. But he heard every word that night, how they called her a joke, a burden, a hog in a dress. The words echoed in him like something familiar. Not pity, recognition. He stood without warning, walked across the room, and drove his fist straight into the mouth of the loudest man. The saloon went silent. Elias dropped a silver coin on the bar, nodded once, and walked out into the night. He didn't know Samantha, but he knew what it meant to be mocked for something you never chose. That night, as snow began to fall again, Elias saddled his horse. He didn't ride for wood, he rode for her. A different kind of man. Samantha sat hunched on the saloon's stoop, her arms wrapped around herself, not just to fight the cold, but to contain the slow unraveling that had become her life. Snow fell in wide, silent flakes, each one softening the hard lines of the world around her. The night sky above was black velvet, the kind that swallowed sound, hope, and time. Her breath rose in silver clouds, each exhale a quiet surrender. She didn't notice the man approaching until he spoke, not because he moved silently, but because her mind had gone numb, tucked into a corner where pain couldn't quite reach her anymore. "You don't know me," the voice said, low and steady. "But I've known people like you, brave ones." Samantha turned, startled, and looked up into the face of Elias Brooks. The lamplight caught the edge of the scar running down his cheek. In another man, it might have inspired fear or caution, but his eyes held no threat, only something raw and unpolished. Not pity, not awe, recognition. "You deserve better," he added. 3 simple words, not wrapped in poetry or promises, just truth, spoken like stone laid into earth. She searched his face for irony, cruelty, even obligation, but there was none. Just a quiet man offering his presence like a steady beam through fog. He didn't press when she didn't respond, just stood there, hat in hand, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. "I live out by the pines. It's not much, but it's safe, just until you figure out your next steps." Samantha hesitated. She had nothing, not dignity, not money, not even the energy to keep saying no to the cold. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The journey to Elias's cabin was silent. He didn't ask questions, didn't stare. When they arrived, he lit a lantern, and warmth spilled out into the room like a held breath finally released. The cabin was built of old timber, thick with history and use. Every chair looked like it had been carved by hand. A bookshelf lined one wall, its contents worn and carefully arranged. There were quilts, yes, but different from hers, simpler, functional. Still, they were clean, thoughtful, lived in. He gave her the bed. No argument. In the days that followed, the silence between them softened. Not the silence of absence, but of respect. Elias never asked what had happened. Samantha never offered. Instead, they spoke through action. She cooked. He chopped. She swept. He repaired a broken hinge on her trunk. In the evenings, she read aloud. Old frontier stories, poetry, passages from forgotten books. Elias would sit by the fire, sharpening tools, listening with a stillness that felt reverent. He showed her how to split logs without splintering, how to spot fresh tracks in the snow. She taught him how to bind wounds with linen soaked in vinegar. They exchanged skills like barter, no debts, only gifts. They didn't touch, not out of fear, but out of something sacred. something being built brick by brick beneath their silences. One evening, after she read a line from a dog-eared volume of Emerson, she laughed, a deep, belly laugh she hadn't felt in months. Elias smiled, not just at the joke, but at the sound itself. "I've never met anyone like you," he said simply. She looked up. "You're not just my perfect fit," he continued, his voice low but clear. "You're the kind of woman I'd build a life with." No poetry, no performance, just a truth spoken from the marrow. And for the first time since the train station, Samantha didn't feel shattered or humiliated or heavy. She felt seen, not for her wounds, but for her worth. Vindication. By late winter, the snow that once cloaked the Montana pines began to recede, revealing dark earth beneath, the kind that promised new life if you were patient and willing to work. Samantha had become part of that landscape, her hands as weathered as the porch beams Elias had carved years ago. She no longer flinched at her reflection, no longer moved like she was apologizing for her shape. She wore Elias's flannel shirts without shame, her hair loose around her shoulders, her cheeks alive with color the cold couldn't dull. She didn't need mirrors now. The land reflected her, honest, untamed, strong. Elias had gone to town early that day, gathering lumber. Samantha had stayed back to knead bread and tend the animals, her world full of familiar motions. So when the knock came, it felt foreign, too loud, too brittle for a place ruled by wind and quiet. She opened the door and saw a ghost from another life. Gregory Allen stood on the porch, hat in hand, clothes stained with ash and regret. His boots were caked in soot, the hems of his coat singed. The fire had not only taken his barn, it had stripped him of certainty. And now, desperation had led him to the door of the woman he had once discarded like broken tack. He looked thinner, his posture less proud, his face lined by sleepless nights. But even in ruin, there was a trace of the arrogance that had once wounded her. His eyes searched hers, confused by what they saw. Not submission or bitterness, but peace, authority, wholeness. "I didn't realize," he began, voice trembling under the weight of a truth he had no words for. Samantha stood still, the dough drying on her hands, her heart steady. "That I was worthy of love?" she said, her voice calm, stripped of any need to wound. "No, Gregory, you didn't, and you never will." She didn't say it to hurt him. She said it because it was final. There was no need for anger. That fire had burned out long ago, before his barn ever did. Elias appeared moments later, snow trailing from his boots. He didn't ask who Gregory was. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked once to Samantha, then to the man on the porch. "We don't need your kind around here," he said, standing beside her, solid as timber. Gregory hesitated as if wanting to speak again, but the silence between them had already closed like a gate. He left without another word, his shadow swallowed by the trees. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came in full bloom. Under a canopy of pine trees dusted with gold pollen and filtered light, Samantha wore a handmade dress and walked barefoot down a path of pine needles. There was no music, just the wind and the heartbeat of the land. The townspeople came, even the ones who once whispered behind her back. They watched her with new eyes now, some with admiration, others with quiet remorse. None dared laugh. They had seen what she had become. She and Elias exchanged vows with hands calloused from building, not just a home, but a life. There was no altar. There was no preacher. But there was truth. Their cabin, once a solitary man's refuge, grew into something more, a place of welcome, of work, of strength forged in silence and kindness. Samantha had not been given justice. She had built it, plank by plank, morning by morning, with a steady spine and an open heart. And the girl once left behind on a frozen train platform had not merely survived. She had become, not the bride someone else had imagined, but the woman she had always been meant to be, the heroine of her own epic, no less. And finally, never again, alone.